Hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited you could be here because this is a topic we've never talked about before, but we absolutely should. I think we're somewhere around 1,000 episodes, and I'm shocked that we have not dove into this because we talk a lot on the show about getting money to be able to grow your business. But here's the question: what happens when you get in trouble? What happens when you're overextended, when you've taken out too much money? With revenue lending, with merchant cash advances, with these high price, high cost, short term financing, it's not that hard to get out of control and to not be able to really get yourself out of the situation that you're in. So how do you do that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about your business lifeline. We're going to talk about turning that kind of distress into opportunity. And with us today is Robert DiNozzi, and that's how it's pronounced in Italy, supposedly. I've heard. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it sounded way cooler than I was going to say it. He's a chief growth officer at Second Wind Consultants, where he leads brand strategy and key relationships with lenders, with investors, and with intermediaries as well, and as well with other stakeholders. Now, he oversees corporate strategy, industry leader partnerships as well, and the development of growth models across banking, private equity, M&A, and franchising. Now, Robert also directs branding, content, and media efforts to convey Second Wind's mission of preserving and unlocking business value. I hope he makes a lot of money because he has a lot of hats that he fills over there at Second Wind. Before joining Second Wind, he actually spent 15 years in Hollywood as a film producer and executive, working with major studios like Warner Brothers, Disney, and Paramount. He produced the box office hit Flightplan, founded a market-leading non-theatrical distribution company, and pioneered tech products, including a top-ranked voice-enabled productivity app and an accessible gaming platform as well. His experience spans creative development, structured finance, and global deal making. An expert in strategic storytelling, he is known for aligning teams around compelling narratives and driving engagement and growth. He's led major brand collaborations with companies like Microsoft and BMW, and teaches the art of pitching story at the university level, combining his backgrounds in entertainment business to help inspire powerful communication. Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Wow, Ty, that was quite an introduction. Thank
Yeah,
you
you've
for
done a
having
lot of cool stuff. I just watched Flight Plan like
I'd actually
this weekend.
forgotten half of those things, so thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, well, it's so good to have you on, man. You've had like an interesting past before. So I gotta ask you, like, what took you from filmmaking to like where you are in in the debt resolution type space?
We could spend 30 minutes on that alone, but essentially Hollywood, which was great and a lot of fun and very rewarding for a long time, was changing substantially away from the consumption of what we call movies proper, towards streaming serialized TV. And that movement of both production and consumption to the Amazon Primes, Netflixes, and those kinds of things really shrunk the amount of both production and consumption in movies. And those are very different mediums, even though they're both entertainment that we experience. Movies are a director and producer driven medium, and TV is a writer driven medium. And as a non-writing producer in television, it's not a particularly attractive place to be. So I was looking for a change. The producer in me likes big ideas, and disruptive ideas. And one of the most ripe places for disruption is the distressed business space. And this can segue us in. Because here's the problem. In distress situations, it's very common to have an over-leveraged balance sheet, a company that cannot support its liabilities, but still has business value underneath. Meaning, if we want to be sort of jargony about it, you can have an EBITDA positive business that's cash flow negative because of debt service. And in the United States, unfortunately, when a business owner is faced with a liquidity crisis or they're simply over-levered, they really think traditionally that there are only one of two plays. One is bankruptcy and a judicial process to resolve distress. The other is more debt and try to, hope and pray that you can outpace that debt with renewed growth. So stacking more debt on top of old typically does not work, does not end well for anybody. And unfortunately, bankruptcy code, which was designed to repay creditors and give a business a chance to restructure obligations and pay them back over 5 years, in a Chapter 11 filing, fail the vast majority of lower middle market businesses. Meaning, if you are the kinds of folks that we're talking to today, your chances of successfully completing a Chapter 11 plan are less than 10%. And basically all small businesses that attempt them fail, and the majority of those are liquidated, leaving people worse off than before for having tried them. And unfortunately, very often the first person that a business owner in trouble calls when they're in trouble is an attorney. And attorneys know bankruptcy. They know how to file bankruptcy plans. That's what they know. We approach it a little bit differently. We do not resolve distress with bankruptcy code or in courts or with attorneys or legal morass or in public facing insolvency proceedings that degrade vendor relationships, that degrade goodwill. Instead, we leverage something called the Uniform Commercial Code. And the Uniform Commercial Code is a set of statutes that govern all commercial transactions in the United States, and it's been adopted evenly by, or equally rather, by all 50 states. And under the Uniform Commercial Code, there is a different form of resolving business distress and relaunching a business, which is called an Article 9 restructuring. And Article 9 refers to a provision in the Uniform Commercial Code that allows a current debtor and their senior lender to cooperate in a restructuring that transitions the business from the current over-leveraged operating entity into a new operating entity in about 5 to 8 weeks with a clean balance sheet, which allows the value to go on being created and allows that guarantor to keep earning and succeeding and thereby make reasonable personal guarantee settlements on loans that were left behind in defaults in the old operating entity. But it's really about value preservation. So this isn't like some get out of jail free card. It's what do you, every business owner that I've met wants to pay what they owe. Problem is, what do you do when you can't? And preserving value becomes something that can align all stakeholders, meaning if you can preserve the business, relaunch the business, then all parties benefit, not just the business owner, but also creditors in the old business who, quite honestly, stand to lose not quite just as much as a business owner, but liquidation doesn't serve anyone. When a senior lender liquidates a business, they get pennies on the dollar for used equipment. It's just complete waste. It's a shambles. So this is probably a longer answer than you wanted to hear, but the goal, not just for us as a firm, but in the entire restructuring universe, we're members of something called the Turnaround Management Association, which is the largest global organization of restructuring professionals, attorneys, lenders that are interested in value preservation. And everyone will tell you that judicial process is not good at saving businesses and business value. And the people who really make out are attorneys and trustees. And that's too bad. So everyone is looking for out-of-court options to quickly resolve distress and relaunch a business. So ultimately, that's what we're talking about. We see a lot of folks who come in stacked with merchant cash advances, just got into trouble. We see generational issues. A son or daughter took over business from a parent who passed away suddenly and made some mistakes. And but the point is, when there's still a good underlying business under there, there's a better way to salvage it, remove it, extract it from the over-levered operating entity than a bankruptcy court. And so I'll stop there because I said a lot.
So I own Company A. Company A has too many high price merchant cash advances. The problem is that I might be profitable, but I'm paying way too much on debt service. I'm paying way too much money in payments to really be able to survive. So I come to Second Wind, and what you're doing is setting up a whole other entity and then moving, let's say, the IP, everything in value from the primary entity to the second entity, and then leaving the debt in the first entity. Am I describing this correctly so far?
Yeah, that's not bad. And that's the full-blown corporate restructuring model. Doesn't necessarily always have to go that far. Sometimes if it's manageable, some businesses can support their MCA obligations with just a reamortization and changing repayment terms and just getting cash flow relief. So sometimes it's not, on one end of the spectrum, it's not always about reducing the amount that you owe. It's just renegotiating terms. And we do a lot of that work as well. But in more, in situations that are more dire, where even changing the payment terms or elongating them isn't going to help, yes. Because what'll happen invariably when that MCA borrower comes to us or anywhere else is they are probably moments away, weeks away from a default. And what happens when you default with a merchant cash advance lender, who tend to be fairly aggressive, and with what you've signed in their contracts, what's going to happen is your operating accounts are going to be swept, and your account debtors are likely going to receive what are called Uniform Commercial Code 9-406 notices, which basically tell your debtor that those receivables that they were going to pay you are not due to you anymore. They are due to the merchant cash advance. So essentially, they're intercepting your receivables and cutting off your cash flow, and that'll kill a business overnight.
And
Um,
I've actually had this happen before in the past too, because I openly share that, some of the crazy stuff that happened in the mortgage business back in the day. But it's actually a real thing. Like, I didn't even realize how far it went. They put a lien on like your future receivables, and then they come in and they literally shut down. Like, I wasn't able to use Stripe anymore. Stripe's like, hey, there's a lien against this. Like, you can't even process payments. I mean, and now I think about it. I'm like, lucky they told me, because
right.
like they could have just taken the money and had to give it to the lender, but they said like, we're not even going to process payments because there's a lien outstanding. So then they're taking your ability to even make future money to get yourself out of it. So the nuclear option is what I just described. But what happens to the debt at that point? Like, does the debt just go unpaid in that entity that we've kind of, I don't want to say abandoned, but the entity we've abandoned or walk away from?
No, well, so merchant cash advances are an interesting use case because their collateral is future receivables. And so once you don't generate any more future receivables, there's really nothing that they're secured to. But, there's not a lot of regulation in the industry. The law is gray and, it varies from place to place in terms of what rulings have been arrived at in various districts. But the bottom line is what would typically end up happening is because the guarantees on a merchant cash advance, they're not quite personal guarantees. They're not true personal guarantees like when you sign a loan to bank. They're called personal guarantees of performance. Now, there's some ambiguity in there. I don't want to bore your listeners with it, but what it means is typically you will arrive at a settlement figure that's in the best interest of everybody. You could litigate, they could litigate, and that number typically winds up somewhere 25 to 35 cents on the dollar. So what we typically do then is we do the following. This is how we get a business owner out of an MCHM without having to go bankrupt personally. You take the business through a restructuring. Now there's a new business with a clean balance sheet that they are earning out of. In the old business, we have settled down that merchant cash advance debt to something that makes sense to the merchant cash advance lenders. It's like, look, if you tried to liquidate this person and go after him, this is what you'd get. That number is 30 cents in the dollar. Okay, let's work with 30 cents in the dollar. And then the business owner who now is earning from that new company will earn and save to make those settlements. But they can, in other words, their settlement savings will be cash flowed by a new healthy company. And typically on a 12 to 18-month timeline, that's how they'll resolve their merchant cash advance obligations without a personal bankruptcy, just by
If
earning
you're
out of the company that they built in the first place.
if you're working that way with the lender to begin with, then why even do the restructure? Like, why is it not possible just to go to the lender and say, hey, lender, like, here's the deal. Like, we'll settle this for 30 cents on the dollar without moving everything.
Wouldn't it be great? I know.
It sounds really
Unfortunately,
good. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's partly that would help, but the other thing is it would still be next to impossible to finance that company. So if the company, even if you reduced the balances and the payments and everything, like if you needed new working capital or anything else, you're not going to get it when a new lender would come in seventh position. So if you really want to relaunch a business, you need to have a clean balance sheet for a new funder to come into.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Makes absolutely perfect sense. So that being said, are you able to negotiate it down to? I'm not sticking on this number, but I'm saying, are you able to take a debt normally and negotiate it down to the 25-30% without all the litigation? Because here's what I found: like, these guys don't mess around. I mean, within a week of you defaulting on an MCA, it's
That,
practical that they're filing a lawsuit within a week. Like, it's
right.
astonishing to me that I've seen that.
Yeah. So we do not experience lawsuits or legal actions. We preclude them, and we also take the business, like we want to move the business operation. We want to take it through a restructuring as soon as possible. And when we've done that, we've now leveled the playing field. So the merchant cash advance lenders now do not have the ability to hold over your head the cutting off of your cash flow, the sweeping of your accounts. That doesn't exist for them anymore. Those accounts aren't there anymore. We are now in a new company, in a new operating entity that is completely separate from the old operating entity. So now we talked about, okay, so there are no more receivables. The operating entity that you lent to or that you advanced to has no more receivables. You have a guarantor who signed something of a personal guarantee, and the negotiation here isn't magic. It's simply this. You could go after them. You could liquidate them. They could declare a personal chapter 7. Let's just look at the numbers. Let's do a liquidation analysis. Let's look at their assets. Let's look at what they have. Let's look at what's on the table. What would you get if you pursued them? And if we can agree on that, then rather than pursuing them, why don't we just make that the number that they will repay you as they earn out of the business that we just saved? And the irony about this is we end up recovering a lot more for merchant cash advance lenders. When they, unfortunately, when you have like a stack of 5 or 6 and the collections actions become really aggressive and you kill a business, all of those junior lien holders get nothing. They literally get nothing. They'll charge off the debt to a debt collector and see nothing for it. Whereas by preserving the business and their guarantor's ability to earn from the new iteration of the business operation, they're recovering 30, call it 35 cents on the dollar, 35 cents on the dollar, which is, a 5, 6, 7x multiple over what they would have gotten in charge off. So believe it or not, it's not as though the junior MCAs are like, I can't believe, how can you do this? It's in fact, I remember one time I met with some principals from On Deck at a conference and explained to them that they could recover, on average 30 cents on the dollar in junior MCA positions when we went through this process, when they weren't the senior lender. And that's, believe it or not, that's a huge value proposition to them because they lend aggressively, they charge for lending aggressively. They also take almost full losses when they're in junior positions. And this keeps them from taking a full loss.
All makes perfect sense to me. So here's the question. What type of person do you help? Is it the business owner that just got their first MCA for 20K, 25K, and they can't pay because the payments are 3, 4K a month or weekly broken down? Or is the person that's leveraged by a certain amount? Like what type of person that's watching this can you help versus somebody you can't really help?
Well, okay, so that's interesting. Sometimes if it's like the first MCA and it's just a little bit unaffordable, I mean, we do have a division that can work with that borrower and with their creditors to just change payment terms, try to make them more affordable. That's the easiest way, something like that. Where we really come in with second wind in an Article 9 restructuring is when that's not going to be the case, right? That when the business doesn't have much run, if we're talking about MCAs, when there's not much run room left, there's a danger of the accounts being swept. They probably have already missed payments or something like that, and the writing's on the wall for the business. And so we work with businesses, about 120 businesses a year, and they range from lower middle market businesses with a few $1,000,000 in revenue to much larger businesses with $150 million in revenue. And up there, they tend to not have merchant cash advance issues. They have different issues. But certainly we see, in the lower middle market, MCAs are almost always part of the distress situation that we see now because they're everywhere.
Yeah, so you're probably not doing a lot with SBA loans and stuff like that.
Sure.
It's
No, we
more,
are. Absolutely, we are. So in other words, in the lower middle market, generally speaking, it's almost the rule, not the exception, that the senior lender is an SBA underwriting bank. And then the guarantor with an SBA loan has taken out merchant cash advances.
so in that situation, is the SBA still getting paid back normally, or are they? And the reason I ask is that I think I understand that if you're defaulting on an SBA loan, like your ability to get any kind of government money is ruined, and until that's cured, I believe is the case. And that's a strong personal guarantee where they can't come over your personal assets. So it seems to me like pretty severe if you especially default on an SBA loan because it's government versus like an
Yep.
MCA.
Right. And oftentimes, having gotten involved with the merchant cash advances will lead to that default with your primary lender, your SBA lender.
Sure.
So what we do there is we go to the SBA, and we've done thousands of SBA cases. We go to the SBA underwriting bank, and chances are whatever bank it is, we worked with them many, many times before. And we show them, we talk to whoever's in portfolio or special assets. Here's your credit. Here's the problem. Here are the MCAs. You don't have a lot of run room. This is not a situation where you can bring a financial advisor in and turn it around. Like literally in 2 weeks, there's going to be nothing there. And they understand that. So what we do is we come up with a number that satisfies the bank for the assets of the business. And we bring in an asset-based lender, factor, inventory lender, ABL, equipment lender, whatever, on the other side to finance the bank's sale of the business assets from the old operating entity into the new one. And then as far as the personal guarantee on the deficient, like in other words, let's say you owed the SBA $1 million and you had $500,000 worth of collateral. Collateralized lenders would buy the assets from the bank for the $500,000, leaving a $500,000 deficiency that you've personally guaranteed. So then what we do for the guarantors, we take them through the offer and compromise process. And we take them through the SBA's offer and compromise process to arrive at what number the SBA will accept based on the earning potential and assets of the guarantor. It's very much like we talked about with the MCAs. They come up with a number. And so whatever that number is, maybe it's 20 cents on the dollar, maybe it's 30 cents on the dollar, sometimes it's as low as 5 cents on the dollar, but whatever that number is now part of the plan because that's what our client who came in needs to earn over time out of the new business in order to resolve that SBA personally guaranteed liability without a bankruptcy.
So, what is the impact on the other side? I already mentioned that I've seen them put a lien on, future receivables. They shut down your ability to process payments at places like Stripe. You mentioned UCC filings in the beginning that could be a benefit, but then they're also a hindrance because UCC filings are out there on your business credit reports showing people you have these outstanding debts.
Yep.
What happens with all that stuff? Because they're taking all these aggressive actions to try to get you to pay. But
Yeah.
what happens with all those aggressive actions as you're going through this resolution process?
So you asked on the other side. So on the other side, there has been a complete break, meaning there are no actions on the other side. So let me just take a step back and explain what an Article 9 sale is. So when you work with the bank, let's say in this case, an SBA underwriting bank, and they've agreed to a number for their collateral, and they're going to then sell that collateral into the new operating entity financed by, an inventory lender and a factor, whatever the case may be. Article 9 is a senior secured lender provision that allows them to sell their collateral to a buyer with the assurance that all subordinate liens and liabilities below them are removed from the assets. So it's a way of resolving all liabilities off of assets outside of court. It just uses the Uniform Commercial Code instead of Bankruptcy Code. So as soon as the bank, it's not like you have a business owner selling their assets to a new operating entity. It's technically speaking, even though it's a going concern and the outside world never sees this, the bank is acknowledging the insolvency. The bank is foreclosing a friendly foreclosure on the assets and selling them into the new operating entity at fair market value, at a close to around a forced liquidation value, which is what they would have gotten if the business failed and they had to go to auction with all your stuff. And in fact, it benefits the bank because not only can the bank then sell their collateral to an operating entity, but because there's still an operating business, to the extent the bank it was not made whole and there's a deficiency, that new business can perhaps pay back the bank a little bit more, which they never would have gotten. So the process really does align a current senior lender and current business owner into this transaction, rather than having them be adversarial and fighting over this insolvent entity and the borrower needs more money and more time and the bank wants that and all that kind of stuff. You've given them both a reason to restructure, because that restructuring in a new operating entity is both in the interest of the original distressed business owner as well as the bank trying to maximize recovery. And on that other side, it's also, oddly enough, in the best interest of the junior creditors on the original company who would have been wiped out in a liquidation. And instead, their guarantor is now earning in a healthy business and can make reasonable settlements on those loans that were essentially removed from the business operation through the Article 9 transaction.
What about industry? Can you help and do this in any industry?
Yeah, pretty much. It's industry agnostic. All states, like I said, the Uniform Commercial Code is uniform or uniformly adopted. The only asset class that does not fall underneath the Uniform Commercial Code is real property, real estate. And so it doesn't mean real estate isn't a part of these scenarios. It's just done as a different kind of transaction that runs alongside with the one that I've been describing.
So you mean like mortgages, for example?
Yeah, or land, Yep.
Makes sense. Is what's a scenario where you cannot help somebody?
When there is no business worth saving, right? So like you don't take a business through a process and get it a clean balance sheet if even then it's not going to succeed. So if the business is so upside down, meaning revenue has just gone through the floor because some new widget came out and just crushed the demand for the one thing that this business meant. In other words, there needs to be a viable business, a business model underneath the distress. So if you remove the distress, do you have an EBITDA positive, or, do you have a profitable business? And if the answer is yes, it's worth taking through a process. If the answer is no, then it's not. But I mean, the metric really is there a business underneath the distress that has a reason to exist that can be profitable?
What if there's not? You can't help them at that point. Can you help somebody through? Because a buddy of mine shutting down his business had issues with the FTC. He had a company come in with the whole, it's not what you do at all, but there's some similarities with what they're doing to wind down the business, right?
Hmm.
What do they do with outstanding software contracts and all
Yes.
this stuff for him to walk away? So those aren't scenarios for you. Those are scenarios for another company that deals with
We,
that wind down process.
I mean, we have done them. Our mission is to preserve going concern business value that would otherwise be lost to a liquidation. That's our strength, right? It's not that we've never helped anyone with a wind down. We can do it. We have done it. But it's not like a primary service that we offer. When a client comes in, sometimes we thought there was a business that could be saved. And then when we realize together that there's not, then we walk them through a wind down. And, for example, personal guarantee resolution, things like that.
So let me ask you this. What's one thing that you wish people knew about business distress and turnaround that most people you talk to don't know?
That their first call shouldn't be an attorney. Because, again, I mean, attorneys within judicial code, and that kills almost as many businesses as high cost lending does. It is, there's a mythology around bankruptcy that it's a second chance, it's all this, and it's just not. I mean, you lose complete control of the business. It's expensive. Every creditor motion is like another proceeding. And, businesses in this end of the market cannot operate in that kind of distressed environment for 18 months with a realistic chance of coming out of a bankruptcy alive. It just doesn't work. And so what happens is, you spend all this money filing a Chapter 11 plan, it fails, and then end up having to file a Chapter 7 liquidation plan. And you've destroyed jobs, you've destroyed business value. I can't tell you the number of times. I actually write for some of the secured finance journals, like the Asset-Based Finance Journal and ABL Advisor and things like that. And sometimes I do case studies of businesses where, a business was weeks away from a liquidation where the guarantor would have been facing millions of dollars in personally guaranteed liabilities. And 2 years later, the business is worth $10 million, $20 million. Old senior creditor got paid off in full. It's like the magic really happens when you can find a way to actually preserve what's good about the business and let that be the fountain from which everyone drinks. Creditors get repaid more, business owner can solve their problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And bankruptcy code is not good at preserving businesses, not in this end of the market. And that's the problem. And anybody in the restructuring world, anyone in the banking world, anyone in the turnaround world, like, this isn't just me, they will all tell you the same thing. Invariably, out-of-court processes are preferred to judicial processes when we're talking about preserving businesses and owners.
Robert, somebody's watching this and they want to talk to you or your team more. They feel like you're speaking directly to them. They've got issues. They know they've got issues. They're scared. They're freaked out. What action should they take to be able to talk to your team or be able to get more info?
Well, they can visit the website and see that, like, here's the other thing I'd love people to know. There is a lot of danger in the so-called debt relief space. And if it's okay, I'd like to dedicate just a minute to a couple of cautionary tales. We are not a debt relief agency, but if somebody's in distress, they are being targeted all over on Facebook and LinkedIn with ads for so-called debt relief companies. All these debt relief companies work with one of two models. First one is stall and save. So they tell you to stop paying your creditors, all of your creditors. And you can then, while you're just ignoring them, you can save, and then they'll go back to them with a settlement offer. That may have worked years ago with conventional lenders. It does not work with aggressive creditors, does not work with MCA lenders. They will not only are these companies huge fee extraction machines. In fact, they have fees called inactive debt fees. So if they do nothing, don't talk to anybody, and don't call anyone, they can charge you 20% of the debt that you've enrolled. There are incentives built in to not do anything. And then the MCAs invariably will kill your operating accounts, intercept your receivables. So these stall and save outfits, very dangerous. The other ads that you'll see are reduce your payments by 80%, reduce your payments by 80%. Okay, you can reduce payments by 80%, 70% through a renegotiation of payment terms. Here's the problem. If that is all a boiler room debt relief operation is doing, if you have 4 or 5 MCAs stacked, all it takes is one of them to not agree, and you can't support the MCA payments, and the house of cards comes tumbling down. It only takes one MCA lender to sweep your accounts or to send 406 notices to intercept your receivables. And so if they don't have, if they're not a restructuring firm and don't have a way to protect your operation, your cash flow, et cetera, that's really dangerous. And so it sounds good, reduced by 80%, but if that's the whole thing and they're banking on global creditor agreement to that, that's really risky. And the stall and save thing is incredibly risky. So beware. And I would say, it doesn't matter to me whether hire us, but at least come to the website and look around and understand what your options really are and learn what to beware of as you're making your decision about finding a trusted advisor. And that's probably the most key thing I can say. When a business is in distress, an owner really needs a trusted advisor who knows how to navigate it with all of the tools. What they don't need is a boiler room shop of 5 people in Florida who say they're attorneys and do one thing only, and then suddenly they're not answering the phones when your business is shut down. So I'll leave it there.
Robert, very valuable stuff. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Ty, it was my pleasure. Anytime you want me back talking about anything, including Italy, I'd be happy to do it.
I love that. All right. So listen, if you're watching this, go to secondwindconsultants.com right now. That's secondwindconsultants.com. While you're on secondwindconsultants.com, scan down to the very bottom, and then you'll find links to their social media channels. Make sure that you like and subscribe. A lot of good, valuable content there. And there's a lot of things you could do at secondwindconsultants.com. But I really implore you to click on resources, because if you're clicking on resources, you'll find articles, you'll find videos, you'll find case studies, you'll find webinars. There's so many different forms of education on secondwindconsultants.com that's worth you visiting. And then there's different options there for you to learn more about the type of scenario situation that you're in and actually get in touch with them to talk more. So implore you, take that step, secondwindconsultants.com. Don't let yourself get to a point where you're over leveraged, you freak out, you just stop paying, you make all these mistakes. Robert talked about a lot of mistakes that you could potentially make, and they're all prompted by fear. You're just afraid. But you don't have to be afraid. You've got somebody there to help you with Robert and his team at Second Wind Consultants. So make sure you just take a moment to actually scan the website, go through, look at the resources, see what resolutions there are for you potentially, and meet with him and his team so you could talk more about some interesting and really unique solutions that can help you move forward with a profitable business while still resolving the debt issues that you're having now. So make sure you check it out right now, secondwindconsultants.com. Thank you very much for tuning in. Take care. Have a great day.